Now, how did we get here? So I was interested in hearing the story from the speaker this morning, and I actually worked in corporate America in human resources, in training and development, and started doing training. And I kept getting this idea after I earned my MBA in 1999 that maybe I could make a business out of this. Maybe I could make this go for myself. And I remember it like it was just yesterday. I was on my riding lawnmower mowing my front yard, and I had been picked to be the succession plan to the vice president of human resources for this billion-dollar company. And I remember it hitting me like a ton of bricks. I knew that if I stayed through one more promotion, it would be nearly impossible for me to leave. So that defining moment made me want to start my own business. And I told myself, I said, you know what? If I can't make this go, I will go back to work. But I wanted to be able to say that I tried. Because I think the biggest regret in life, or the biggest, tragedy in life is regret. I wished I would have. I should have. So I said, I'm going to try it. So I started the business in November of 2002, doing primarily soft skills training, HR training, some safety training. And I slowly kept getting asked to do more and more leadership training. And it was funny, in 2004, 2 years into this experience, I had a man ask me a question that was another defining moment in my life. He said, John, are you a leadership expert? And I said, whoa. I don't know if I wear that title very well at all, but I would call myself a student of leadership. Someone who loves to study and analyze why people follow or choose not to follow others. That moment made me decide that if I'm going to stand in front of groups and talk about leadership, I better have a leadership perspective. So between that moment in 2004 and 2009, I formulated my own belief, my own model of leadership that follows the servant leadership model. And that led to the publication of my first leadership book titled Leadership Among Idiots. Now, by show of hands, how many in the room have ever worked with an idiot before? Raise your hands. Whoa. How many work with an idiot now? Raise your hands. Here's the big test. How many work for an idiot? Raise your hands. Oh, there's some sneaky hands in the back. I'm guessing your boss is here. So that book, if you'll pull out your smartphones, I'm going to give you a gift. I give a gift every time I speak. If you'll go to www.johngrubbs.com, just like it sounds, johngrubbs.com, if you're on there for a few seconds, a pop-up will appear. You can have that book for free. I give that book for free every time I speak because you are giving me the most precious gift one human can give another, and that is your time. And in my appreciation for you giving me your time, I will give you that book for free. It sells for $20 on Amazon right now, but you can have it for free. You can choose it in a PDF format or in a Mobi format if you read your books on Kindle. So that book did fairly well by small book standards, and the publisher said, hey, John, we want you to do another one of those idiot books. Will you do that? I said, sure, I'll do it. So I started doing research. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was eating breakfast at a Holiday Inn Express, and we'll test your geography here, in Paragould, Arkansas. Does anyone in the room know where Paragould, Arkansas is? It's not far, Renee knows where it's at. It's not far from Jonesboro, Arkansas, or Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm doing my ritual thing in the morning. I read the front page of each section of the USA Today. And I'm still contemplating, still researching for this next book. And on the front page of the business section, there was a lady standing next to a boat. And on the back of the boat, it said First Boomer. I'm like, First Boomer? What is that? Well, I went ahead and read the article. And lo and behold, her claim to fame was that she is the very first baby boomer born in the United States, born on January 1st, 1946 at 12:01 a.m. And she claimed to be the first boomer. But the article went on to share some statistics about the pending retirement of the baby boomers, and that's when I said, oh my gosh, this is the book I've got to write. So in 2011, I published a book called Surviving the Talent Exodus, Navigate the perfect storm for generational change in the workplace. And I said, this is it. Bestseller, I'm going to be on Oprah. Do you know that for the balance of 2011, I could not get any traction? I couldn't get CEOs to listen about this pending storm that I saw coming in the workplace. There's even a chapter in the book called The Workplace 2020, where I postulated what would the workplace look like in the year 2020. No traction. I felt like the guy running up and down the beach telling these CEOs, there's a storm coming, there's a storm coming. And they're sitting in this Adirondack chair on the beach, looking up at this cloudless sky with a Corona and a lime, thanks to KBC. Can we give them some more love, please? You gotta love our beer distributors. They're saying, what storm, John? What storm? 2012, I couldn't get any traction. 2013, everything changed. My book was one of the first books to hit the business market about that topic, and I started getting asked to do this. Come to places like this and talk about this generational change. People started seeing the shift occur. The outer bands of the storm were starting to come ashore. And that book put me on the speaker market. Well, you can't go back to the same conference and give the same speech that you gave the year before, so I had to go back and write another book. Dang it. So in 2015, I published a book called Leading the Lazy, How to Get the Most Out of Today's Workforce. I'm a little nervous because I don't want you millennials mad at me. But it is a deep dive into the millennial workforce, the millennial mindset. And there's a lot of data that I captured that really clearly defines what makes millennials different from previous generations. More specifically, it's not us Generation Xers that call the millennials lazy. Which generation do you think has that honor? The boomers. There's such a diverse school of thought between the boomers and the millennials. And this ideation that they're lazy started being prevalent in a lot of the conversations about the workforce. And by the way, I dispel that myth real early in the book, so I hope I can be saved by your graces by telling you that. They're different, not necessarily lazy. Okay? Now, there's some lazy people in all generations, but to give them that label is patently unfair, and you'll figure out why as I go through this information. I'm a little bit scared to get near the speakers, so that's why I'm kind of standing in the middle. I normally like to get around and go near everyone, but I'm in the process now of writing 2 sequels to those books, and both books were set to be released in 2020. But I told myself, I said, you know, I can go ahead and release these books on schedule, but how can I not pause and include the impact of COVID-19 in both of those books? So they've both been tabled while I work on bringing both of those books to a resolution that includes the pandemic, which is not over. And one of them is a huge risk. It is meant for all of you who might be suffering, whether you're medicated or not, with ADD. It is a picture book for grown-ups. And you'll be able to read the entire book in less than an hour if you just want to look at the graphics that an artist has created for me. The other one is a more traditional book. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about 5 insights. And if you don't get one bit of value from this presentation, I think you're going to get at least some entertaining information that you can take back with your organizations. So look at number 1. What happened on January 1st, 2011? Anybody want to guess? Say again? The iPhone. No, that's a great guess, but that's not it. January 1st, 2011. Yeah, they started turning 65 years old. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about why is training more important now than it's ever been. And you've had some really good information leading up to where I'm going to go with this part of the presentation. And then, does communication create a competitive advantage for your organization? And does it allow you to keep great employees? I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And then the last 2 bullets, how do you develop a learning mindset for your team? There is a difference between being intelligent and being intellectual. Now, how many of you are in sales? Whether you're kind of in sales or for sure in sales, raise your hand. So one of my litmus tests for hiring a sales rep, because I do two types of training primarily. I do leadership training and I do sales training. But if you're interviewing for a job with me and I ask you, what is the last leadership book or blog or article that you follow, and you can't answer that question, I'm not hiring you because you're not intellectual. An intellectual person is someone who's constantly learning, constantly in a passionate pursuit of knowledge. I'm more passionate about what I don't know than what I do know. And then look at the last one. How do you get your corporate values to the front lines? What do you think the best answer to that is? Why are we here? Quick story about David. I told him this when we were on our lunch break. I first heard him speak 3 years ago, and I've always been a values guy. I always said decision making is easy when values are clear. And it wasn't until I heard him speak that I said, you know what? I still agree with that. But when he said values are fuzzy and that we need to take them down to another level, I said, that I'm in. I agree. It was a learning experience for me. And my favorite David Friedman story, I tell almost every time I talk about him, was when he shared a story, which many of you probably heard, but I'm going to share it just in case, about a women's high school lacrosse team in southern New Jersey. Is that right? Who was an enduring powerhouse for many years, despite the fact that they're losing 25% of their staff or their team every year and 100% every 4 years. How do you keep that greatness going? And there's only one word, and that's what? Culture. Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that's why you're here, culture. So let's talk about the reality that we're facing. Every one of you have one of these devices in your hand. And do you know that this device has more computing capability than the entire knowledge of humanity that's come before it? In other words, we have access to more information. Not since the 1400s has humanity lived through what we're living through right now, and we take it for granted. What was invented in the 1400s that changed humans' access to information? Yeah, Gutenberg invented the printing press. Prior to that, humans didn't read or write. Not many anyway. Typically, the very upper crust of humanity were readers and writers. How did the rest of us share information? Stories. Stories. I'm bringing you some really good stories today. Stories that I hope you're going to remember. Stories that I hope are going to impact you both intellectually and emotionally. But think about this change. Sociologists are going to look back at this period in history and go, wow, wow. I'm a Generation Xer. Some of you millennials may not believe it, but we didn't grow up with computers in our homes. We certainly didn't have phones. You know what our social media was? It was making a certain lap around town so that you could find your friends. How many can relate? Raise your hands. Look at those hands. That was our social media. And my kids make fun of me today in my little hometown where they go, what are you doing? I said, I'm making a lap. They go, making a lap? Why do you do that? It's just what we did. This is how we found our friends. We had to make a lap. And the neighbor in town next to me, they have a Sonic. And a young man, which I won't name, said that when he was growing up, he couldn't afford 4 new rims for his truck. So he bought 2 brand new rims and put them on the same side. I'm like, why are you doing that? He said, John, I only need it to be on the Sonic side. The outside doesn't matter, only the side that they're going to see as we cruise the Sonic. Rationalization, right? You've already heard us talk about that. So after this morning's dialogue, I wanted to say something, and I said, you know what, I'll wait. I'll just wait. And I went up to my room, and I added a slide. And I wanted to put this slide in here because I think it's a really important piece that we haven't talked about yet today. And I want a little bit of your feedback. I know I'm limited on time, but I want a little bit of feedback from you about this next slide. Who you terminate says the most about your dedication to your culture. Amen? We talk about hiring. We talk about bringing good people on board. We talk about recruiting through our fundamentals. But do we fire based on our fundamentals? Do we remove those people who are toxic or antithetical to our fundamentals? Do we do that? Because if we don't, we've got a problem. Now, how many of you would say your company does really, really well with this slide? Raise your hand. Why? They do it. Anybody else? He said, can I quote you? I can say this if it's a quote. He said they have a no asshole policy. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
So it basically means that nobody at the company has the right to make somebody else at the company feel bad about themselves.
Awesome.
And if you did, you've exhibited asshole-like behaviors.
So is being an asshole in one of your behaviors? I mean, in your fundamental? Yeah. Okay, it's a separate policy. I've heard no talented jerks, no jerks allowed. But you got to think about this. You can do all of this wonderful work that we've talked about. And I think it's essential. It's essential work. But if you don't get rid of the toxic people, they are tumors. And I'll come to you. There are two types of tumors within an organization. There's benign tumors and there's malignant tumors. The benign tumors cause pain, but the malignant tumors will kill your organization. Yes, ma'am.
Just an HR person, leader talking, but I think the fundamentals make it easy in employee relations to identify what that employee is not doing that is causing that employee relation situation, up to and including that termination.
Awesome.
Before we had it, was, well, they got a bad attitude. Well, what do you mean a bad attitude? We got to define that for them. But the fundamentals make that easy to do.
I agree. Good stuff. So think about this. You have people on your team right now, if you have any mass, any size, who are probably not a good fit. And you don't know how many times I've been told in the recent months that a warm body is better than nobody, even if they're counterproductive to our culture. And I don't agree with that. You know, I just had a CEO let one of those jerks go. I'll use my word, not his. And she said she's been putting off this since February of this year. And finally, she processed it with our Vistage group. How many Vistage members are in here? Raise your hands. A few. She processed it with our Vistage group, and the Vistage group told her, you need to fire him this week. You've got enough documentation, do it this week. So she did. She sent me a text afterwards and said, oh my gosh, I've had at least 3 people come up to me saying, I should have done that a long time ago. So the pain that you may observe as a leader is often minuscule by comparison to the people that work with those individuals feel. You know, it's typically like the ladder. If you got a jerk climbing up a ladder, if you're above him, you see a smiley face. What do the people below the person see? What he said. So this video will set the tone for the concept that I just shared with you. Because people interview real well.
This is the venue they chose for their fake auditions for an advert for lip balm.
We're hoping that we can use part of this in a national commercial, right? And this is a test on some lip balms that we have over here. And these are our models who are going to help us, Roger and Matt. And we have our own lip balm, and we have a leading brand. Would you have any problem kissing our models to test them? No. You think that was fine?
That would be fine.
Okay. So that this is a blind test, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put a blindfold on. Okay, now can you see anything?
No.
Hold up so you can't even see down.
Okay.
It's completely blind now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now what I'm going to be looking for in this test is have something that makes your lips, okay, the texture, right, and maybe if you can discern any flavor or not.
Okay.
Have you ever done a kissing test before? Are you excited? Take a step in. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to pucker up big and lean in just a little bit, okay? Okay. All right.
Oh, so when it comes to people, we're going to kiss a few chimps from time to time, right? We're going to think we're getting one person and get someone totally different. I heard several conversations about that this morning through the interviewing process and why you use your fundamentals as a criteria for people being onboarded onto your teams. So let's go through this idea here. Culture is something your people can feel. Let me say that again. It is a living, real thing that people can feel. And those of you who are Vistage members, have you ever heard Ryan Walter speak? Ryan Walter, anybody? Does that name ring a bell? He was either the number one or number two draft pick in the National Hockey League. And he came to our group and he was talking about being in flow and what it's like to have a future positive or future negative or past negative, past positive mindset about where you are in your current state of reality. And he said, you know, what was so revealing to him was when he was drafted, if you're number one or number two, do you go to a really good team or a really bad team? A bad team. And I don't remember the name of the teams because I'm not that intimate with hockey. But he said 2 or 3 years later, he was part of a big trade to one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. And he said, John, you could feel the difference in the locker rooms. You could feel it. He said, I can't tell you how, but it was a feeling that I could almost touch. He said in the losing team, everybody was blaming each other, everybody was down on, everybody was making excuses. It was a culture that felt horrible. But yet, when he got to the winning team, it was a completely different feeling. So I want you to remember, your people can feel your culture. And one of my favorite things that David says is, do you have a culture by chance or a culture by design? I want you to design something that people want to feel, they want to be a part of. So many stories I've heard today of people feeling your culture during the interview process. Someone leaving a job that pays less to come to your company because they felt your culture in the interview. People can feel it. So how did this generational thing break down? And by the way, I know I've got some HR people in here. These dates they overlap a little bit. So you read 10 experts will say this date, 10 experts will say that date. So I kind of took a position in the middle of most of the research and data that I found. But here's where I see the breakdown. On January 1st, 2011, we started seeing 10 to 12,000 baby boomers retire from the workplace. Think about that, 12,000 per day. And I asked people, as we see more and more and more, 2015 was the passing point, by the way, where the millennials no longer became the dominant generation. Where the baby boomers were no longer dominant and the millennials became the dominant workplace presence. But do you know how many companies didn't have a plan to capture any of that information that was leaving their workplace? Some companies were so myopic they were offering early retirement. Let's chase our knowledge out of here. Did you see it in your organizations? Let's give them a package. So today we're going to talk about what is the replacement employee like? So here's how I define the boomers. And again, there's play on one end, but one end that's pretty much consensus is 1946. What happened in 1946 to start the baby boom? World War II ended, all those sailors and soldiers and Marines and airmen came back and got busy. And there were a lot of babies born. And if you want to know what makes them the way they are, think about this from a perspective of their parents. What did the parents of the baby boomers live through? The Great Depression. And they were taught at an early age that you get a good job and you stick it out. You outlast the bad bosses. And they did. You know, this was a period in our country when we were rebuilding. We were the only industrialized game in the world. And companies had more demand than they could supply. And people got married to their companies. I mean, all of you know a baby boomer that gave 30, 40 years to the same company. And there was this reciprocity of mutual long-term benefit. Stay with us. We'll take care of you and your spouse for the rest of your life. And they did. But what happened when us Generation Xers, oh, by the way, 90 million, we're going to keep these numbers. What happened when us Generation Xers came along? We were born between 1964 and 1980. And we saw in the late 70s and early 80s, our parents laid off from those so-called lifetime jobs. We saw the era of layoffs. And we had a different approach to work. We said, you see what that loyalty got you? It got you a trip to the unemployment line. So as a consequence, we're not nearly as loyal. They say us Gen Xers, by the way, we're the smallest generation, but I think we're the coolest generation because we gave humanity the best music ever known to mankind. Our 90s hair bands, right? Amen? Love ZZ Top, Motley Crue, Van Halen, Def Leppard. Millennials say, not so much. But we're not loyal. Our average tenure on the job is 5 years. 5 years. You know, I have never worked for another company more than 5 years. I've been working for myself almost 20. I've been thinking about quitting too. We are not loyal. As a matter of fact, most Gen Xers always have their resume ready. We may not be looking, but we'll entertain any serious offers, right? Now that was pre-pandemic. I heard a statistic earlier. I've got some more recent data that says more than 50% of all workers in this country are considering a job change right now. More than 50%. I think it was Inc. magazine last week that reported that. Which means it's a heavier lift for us to keep the talent that we have. So 90 million, 40 million. Now let's talk about the millennials, born between 1981 and 2000. And if you think about that generation's major influence was the internet. Most millennials cannot remember the world before the internet. Most of them never had to put up with that annoying AOL dial tone when we connected to the internet in the early days. If you're my age, you know it, right? But look at their average tenure. This was pre-pandemic. 16 to 18 months was the average tenure of a millennial on the job. And it was starting to creep up. Why do you think the tenure of the millennials was starting to creep up? What was happening to them? Getting older and getting what? Kids and family. So it started creeping up. I estimate that it will never get more than 24 months on average. And I haven't seen the impact of the Great Resignation yet. So there's a good chance that that number is going to go back down. So you have to think about that. If you can keep a millennial worker 2 years, you have broken the statistical average. You've broken the curve. And you think about the impact that culture can have on that. Every one of you can be atypical companies if you can bend that curve past that time frame. You can be different than the traditional average organization that's competing for the same talent. So we got 90 million, 40 million, 70 million. And what that created was what we call the dumbbell effect. We had two large generations surrounding one smaller generation. And if you think about the impact that that's had on the workplace, you're starting to see it now because by the year 2025, millennials will be 75% of the workplace, 3/4, which means all these young people in this room are the future managers, vice presidents, and CEOs. My CEO group has gotten so young. I've got a 27-year-old CEO of a $5 million construction company. The median age for my CEO group since you came a couple of years ago is probably around 40. So there are a lot of young CEOs in the workplace if my group is representative of what you're seeing. Are you seeing the same thing, that leaders are getting much, much younger? Yeah. Which means they're going to bring different thinking, different ideas, well, in some cases, different strategies for business. Which is why I asked the question earlier. I really think I'm leaning towards, I would much rather have a recent graduate with the minimum qualification skills with no experience than someone with a little bit of experience who is a mediocre candidate. If I can hire a great attitude, I can train them. I can develop them. But I can't make someone who's qualified have a good attitude. I've had companies hire me, John, will you come train our people? We've got bad attitudes. I said, you can pay me, but I cannot change anybody's attitude. And by the way, I have no forgiveness for a bad attitude. That is the one thing in life we can control, is our attitude. Doesn't mean we don't get in bad moods, but folks, we can control our attitude. And I don't think you should ever tolerate a perpetual bad attitude. And like Sue said, which I think is brilliant, how do you document a bad attitude? When they contradict your fundamentals, right? So, this is a humorous video, but I want you to get something from this. There's something intrinsically valuable to the humor in this video. Because here's what we think. We think that we are better to handle the unexpected than we really are. In other words, we think that if something unexpected happened to us, we kind of know how we would respond. And from my time in the military, from my time studying martial arts, I know that's not true. And when we're surprised, when we are taken out of our comfort zone, we default to our training. We default to our baseline learning. So watch this video with that in mind. So though that's humorous, I want you to understand that that is how we react in spontaneous situations that we're not prepared for. And by having your fundamentals so ingrained into your culture, you want your organization to be able to default back to that baseline, not to something that they think they're going to do. How many of you were in the military? Raise your hands. Thank you for your service. But we would drill over and over and over and over and over so that when you had a stressful situation, be it combat or whatever, we defaulted back to our training. And I think that's a great opportunity for you to have your fundamentals so ingrained into your organization that that's where you default to when things get difficult. We were talking about that at dinner last night, that when you have a difficult conversation, do you default to speaking straight? Do you go to that? You say, you know what? It's not that I don't care about your feelings, but resolving this issue is more important than your fragile feelings. And be willing to live that way. So we're having a great time, right? You knew it was coming. So let's talk about why millennials are different. And this is where you millennials can certainly tell me if you disagree. You can come up to me afterwards. You can stay in touch with me. You can reach me through my website. But here's what the evidence I discovered says about the millennials. Why are they different? Because some people make the argument, it's just another generation. No, I looked for that. I tried to find that. I tried to say, is it just generational change? No. So here's what happened with the millennials. For the first time in our recent history, there were two subsets that developed amidst the millennial children in our country. One subset of millennial children were kids raised by a single mother who loved them more than life themselves, but she was always working. Sometimes 2 jobs, maybe 3 jobs to pay rent on a rent-controlled apartment in any city USA. Philadelphia, Dallas, Houston, Chicago, it doesn't matter. No dad. So where were those children getting their influence and values from if there were no other family around, their peer groups? So you wonder why some kids don't come to an interview with the same basic skill set that you think is normal. It's because they've just never been exposed to it. That's one subset. The other subset of millennials were raised by what we call helicopter parents, who have hovered over those children, micromanaged those children, given them everything they've ever asked for, told them how awesome they are, solved all their problems, and then they get to the real world and they find out, wait a minute, you mean I'm not really that awesome? I've been told I was awesome my whole life. How can I not be awesome? My parents told me I'm awesome. Coach Bobby Bowden just died recently. He was asked, they said, Coach Bobby Bowden, how do you get the kids of today? He was a longtime football coach at Florida State University. How do you get the kids of today to do what you got the kids of 30 years ago to do? What do you do different? He said, really, I don't coach any different than I did 30 years ago. But the only difference is today I've got to explain why. I've got to explain why I'm doing something. And then the longtime baseball coach at University of Texas, Augie Garrido, he was asked about the same question. How do you compare the kids of today that are coming into the University of Texas as baseball players compared to the kids of 30 years ago? He said it was very different 30 years ago. Even though we're a Division I school, if you were recruited to play baseball at our university, you had to do work. You had to prepare the field. You had to help take care of the field after the games. The players did the work. He said, today the players don't do the work. He says, as a matter of fact, if I take a player, if I tell one of my players, hey, I'm going to move you from second base to first base for tonight's game, you know how the player might respond? But coach, I got scouts coming to see me. I need to be in my position. It's a very self-centered reality for some parts of that generation. Mark this down if you're taking notes. We are seeing more clinical narcissism now than we have seen in recorded psychological history. Just look it up. And the narcissism is being created by the way some parents, me included, I'm guilty of this too, have over-parented our kids. And, you know, I can't tell you that I don't spoil kids, because I have. And it's hard not to, right? We're going through a weaning process with one of my kids. The video's off right now, right? Okay. We're going through a weaning process with my oldest, because he still, you know, he defaults back to us. And I know none of you have kids that way, right? None of you have 20-somethings that are still marginally on your payroll, right? I'm the only one in the room, right? Whew. Okay. I guess I'm the only one. But that's what makes this millennial generation different. And they were also sold a bill of goods that, I won't go deep into this because it's another speech, but you can ask me about it, you can inquire about it. But we're also, Generation X has also been a parent that sold these kids unintentionally on the idea that if they didn't go to a four-year university and get a degree of some sort, that they were somehow failures. And we didn't do it on purpose. Sometimes we did it subtly, like, you know, I got your college account. I've been saving and struggling and putting money aside. I'm saving this for you. It's so important that you use this, so I'm saving it for you. How does a kid say they don't want to go to college? And I asked some of my older son's friends, I said, why did you go to this college? Why did you pick that degree? They said, I don't know, I had to pick something. You know people like that? I just had to pick something. And they're leaving with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, with a degree they never planned to use. Now, Generation Z, what I call iGen, because they will never remember the world before the iPhone, they're breaking the mold. You're seeing many, many of those Generation Zers breaking that pattern. They're opting for skills and trades, more skilled trades than ever. Are you seeing that in your communities too? I don't want to go to the university. I want to go get a skill. I want to make money now. Raise your hands if you're seeing that in your communities. Yeah, it's different. It's a different generation. Millennials are also nomads. I will bet that no parent in this room have had boomerang kids come back to them in their 20s. Am I right on that? None of you have 20-year-olds living with you, right? I could have asked that the other way, but I'm going to let you save face. You know, my generation, my dad said, hey, when you're a certain age, we're breaking your plate. We're breaking your plate. And my boys are 7 years apart, and when my oldest moved to college, you know what my youngest asked me? He said, Dad, he said, are you going to make his room into a naked room? Do you remember the movie, Ferry to Launch, when Terry Bradshaw made the room into a naked room? I said, no, son, we're not doing that. We're not having a naked room in that. He did ask that, though. So let's talk about what's important to millennials. And I really want you guys to share a story or affirm this. Work is important to millennials, but it's not how they define themselves. So if you're an Xer with me, what's your first name? Robert. Let's say Robert and I are at a common friend's barbecue. We don't know each other, never met each other, but we're at a common friend's barbecue and we're up making our plate. What would be, if not first, but it would be in the top 3 questions, what would we ask each other? Yeah, where do you work? What do you do? Do you know that might not be in the top 10 for a millennial? It's not how they define themselves. So we have to realize that, yes, their career is important. Their work is important, but it doesn't define the human being that they are. And for previous generations, we were very much defined by our work. So flexibility is the key. This slide was it rolled off the tongue so easily before the pandemic. And in my book, I wrote that we're going to see the beginning of the end of the 40-hour work week with the millennial generation. You know what the millennials say? Who in the heck came up with 40 hours anyway? Where did that come from? Did someone pull it out of midair? Why 40? You know, they say, you know what happens when you pay 40 hours? You end up paying for sit put rather than output. And how many have heard of Parkinson's Law? Or Horstman's corollary to Parkinson's Law? So listen to this. Parkinson's Law says we allow work to spread to fit an allotted amount of time. So you give me 8 hours to do it, I'll do it in 8 hours. And many of us Generation Xers have seen people sit at a desk just to consume the 8 hours. They were done a long time ago, but they got to sit there. They got to show up at 8, got to leave at 5. The day was prescripted for them. That's because of Parkinson's Law. Well, guess what? Horstman's corollary, it's Horstsmans. Horstman's corollary to Parkinson's Law says that we can shrink work to fit an allotted amount of time. So I wrote an article recently about changing the default in meetings from 1 hour to something else. So it's hey, instead of if you've got 5 people that report to you, instead of having an hour-long staff meeting, have a 33-minute meeting. Each one of your people get 5 minutes, and you get 3 minutes to summarize. Why do we default to an hour? Guess what? You can shrink their work too. It may not mean you get everything accomplished. You may have to have another meeting, but it will save you a ton of time in your week if you'll just rethink how you do meetings. What do you think pandemic has done to this? What do you think coronavirus, COVID-19 has done to this idea of flexibility? Yeah. So we had a sales speaker come speak to our group in August of last year. Listen to what he said. He said, and he's one of those scientist guys that studies a lot of the science around what's going on. He said the pandemic fast-forwarded the sales industry by 6 years in a matter of 6 months. He said what was going to happen in 6 years happened in a matter of 6 months. If it had organically taken place, it would have slowly occurred. But because we were forced to embrace technology, I had never heard of Zoom before the pandemic. I use some meeting platforms, GoToMeeting, well, there was another one I don't use, but I'd never heard of Zoom. Now, Zoom is a verb. Hey, let's Zoom. Crazy. So here's what a millennial thinks. As long as the work gets done, who cares when it gets done? As long as it gets done on time, who cares? Am I wrong? And I can work anytime. I can work early in the morning, I can work late in the afternoon, I can work in the evening, I might wake up in the middle of the night and do the work. So we're going to see a more production-based reality as they take over the workplace. So here's my idea for you millennials. Once you start taking over the workplace, you're going to get rid of some of those old ways of thinking. You're going to like, I don't care if you're here or not, as long as the work gets done. So it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. And there's too many young leaders in this room to believe that it's not, that they're going to change it. It's going to be different. I hired a new assistant, and she is so good. She's 22 years old. I've never met her in person. But she has introduced me to so many tools to save time for me. I'm upset. I'm pissed off I didn't hire her a long time ago. I mean, she is so out in front of me when it comes to technology and so amazing. I'm like, wow, wow. You mean you could do that for me? Absolutely. You can do that too? Absolutely. That too? Yep. It's easy. She's got an app for it. So millennials do want to make a difference, folks. They are very value-oriented. That's why these fundamentals are so timely for this generation. They want to believe in something. How many of you have a business? I was going to ask this at supper last night, but I held it for today. How many of you have a business that has a purpose that has nothing to do with your business, that is at the very top or the very center of your organization? Raise your hand. Cool. What is it? Serve others. Does it? We're a technology company. What do you do? What do you sell? Yeah. Awesome. Nobody else. Just what is it? Hope. Okay. So I gave a speech to a company in Dallas. They make cameras, dash cameras for police cars, chest cameras. And when you walk into their lobby, their entire lobby is covered with pictures of water wells in Africa. And there's smiling faces on those pictures, and they're done really well throughout their lobby. And I asked the CEO, I said, what's up with the lobby? He goes, we got a purpose that transcends what we do as an organization. I said, really? This was a couple of years ago. I said, what is it? He goes, our company made a commitment that we would make sure every human being in Ghana, Africa had access to clean drinking water by the year 2025. And we send people over there, we send money over there. He said, that is our purpose. That is our mission as an organization. Even though it has nothing to do with what they make. They have a purpose. So look at this young machinist. Listen to what he said. He's excited to work. So many blue-collar hands went up a while ago. He's excited to work in an electrical shop precisely because it's an environment where you can produce something useful. You can see people glad they have this piece of equipment that never existed before. It's magic to them. You know, I think we get in the habit of just going through the motions with our business. Gotta make the donuts, gotta make the donuts. And we don't tell people the magic of what your product or service does for the community. Or we don't tell them enough, or we don't magnify it enough. I'm gonna tell you what, beer distributor, that's an important part of a community, isn't it? So let me show you through a story how we can connect with each other emotionally, how I can connect with each of you emotionally. Someone said it this morning, but guess what? This generation is primed for you to connect with in an emotional way that may blow your mind. And I'm going to show you how I can literally, I don't know most of you, I've met some of you, but how I can connect to your heart just immediately. For some of you, this is going to get emotional. And I couldn't tell this story for a long time. 2016, I was coming back from a camping trip with some of my buddies. And I get a call that my dad's in the hospital. I'm like, hospital? Now, he'd had a stroke much earlier when in 1994 when he was 54. So he wasn't really in great health, and he wasn't really himself after that. But in 2016, sorry, it's 2006. I got the wrong date up here. 2006, I get this call that my dad's in the hospital. Okay, so I rush back home, find him that he's having trouble swallowing. Well, we found out real quickly that he has esophageal cancer and that it is metastasized and spread and that there's no need for chemo. Have any of you been through that with a loved one? Well, you know that when that happens, your life devolves really quickly into three realities. You're at work, the hospital, or at sleep. It's all. And from that day until November 30th, when he passed away, we were all over the hospital. Move from this part, do this type of surgery, try to do this, try to do that. And I remember it was late October, about this time of the year. Dad was going to pass away at the end of the following month. I was at the hospital by myself with my dad, which was unusual because my mom was still alive at the time. I've got a brother. But for some reason, it was supper time and it was just me with Dad. And they bring in the food and I'm trying to get Dad to eat, but he won't eat. Got to eat. And about that time, Kevin knocks on the door. Kevin is one of my best friends from graduate school. He's also a PA, physician's assistant. Comes in and we're talking and Kevin's talking to Dad. We're all three talking and I'm still trying to get Dad to eat. And then out of the blue, Kevin goes, "Can I talk to you outside for a minute?" I said, "Sure." And I remember it like it was yesterday. Went outside the door, I was leaning against the wall. I remember putting my boot on the wall, and he stands there in front of me with as much love as he could muster on his face, and he goes, "John, what are you doing in there?" And I could feel myself get red and hot and angry. I go, "What do you mean, what am I doing in there?" He goes, "You're pushing him kind of hard, aren't you?" I said, "Kevin, he's got to eat. He's got to eat, brother." And I don't know where he got the strength to do this, but listen to what he said to me. He mustered up as much courage as he could, and he goes, "John, that time's past. You need to just love on him." Man, that was a hard moment for me to realize that I had to say goodbye. But man, did I need to hear that? And such a blessing for him to be able to say it. How much courage did it take for him to do that? And I tell you that story because I want to show you, if you have been through what I've been through, if you've been through, and I wish I could keep you from ever going through it. I wish I could. I didn't know that dying was a process just like birth. I didn't know that. That was the first time I'd ever grieved. First time I ever lost somebody close to me. Never gone through grief before. It was a hard time for me to realize that I needed to just let go. I needed to just be a good son and to love. And if you've been through that same experience, our hearts just connected. And when you talk about behaviors in your organization, I want you to think about the behavior, the fundamental of connecting with your people at an emotional level. Every single one of you are going to go through difficult times. Every one of your people are going to go through difficult times. And here's what I say, if we can't be there for our people during the tough times, we don't deserve them during the good ones. We don't deserve them. We connect emotionally, and that is a strong connection. It's a connection that can't be broken, and it gives us so much opportunity to screw up as leaders. And we do. But when we're connected emotionally like that, we get the benefit of the doubt. So what to expect from millennials? They are comfortably self-reliant. More millennials are starting businesses than any other generation before it. My senior in high school, he started a lawn mowing business. And that kid is a saver. He doesn't spend his money. He's made $5,000 this summer just mowing yards and still has it in his bank account. He runs it like a business. He's a little entrepreneur. He's trying to figure out what to do in the winter. He said, maybe I should buy this $1,000 pressure washer and start pressure washing. He's trying to figure out how to keep the flow of income coming. Different from my first one. We don't snowplow in Texas, no. But here's the thing, they want technology now. Let me say this with as much kindness as I can. If you're not on the leading edge of technology, or at least close to it, you will lose good people. One millennial quit because the computer was too slow. And people laugh about that, but that's real, right? It's ridiculous. I'm working with dinosaurs. I've never seen a floppy drive in my lifetime. I've heard about them. And they want to be thrilled. They want to be challenged. They want to be pushed. There's a misconception that with millennials you can't be tough bosses. Well, that is false. And you know how we prove that out? Sports. Both my boys respond to tough coaches. Coaches that will, get in their tail. But one thing has to exist in order for them to put up with that type of coaching, and that's what? What? They need to know that coach cares about them and believes in them. So I teach a quadrant, and I can show you any of you this. So imagine an axis moving vertically, and beside it it's got challenged. Imagine an axis moving horizontally, and beside it it's got important and appreciated. If you want to learn how to retain people, they need to be challenged, and they need to be feel important and appreciated. If you create that into a quadrant, the people in the upper right, they stay. The people in the lower left, they leave. The people in the bottom right, they're highly appreciated and feel important, but they don't feel challenged, they're bored. And the people in the upper left, if you're drawing this, they burn out. Highly challenged, but don't feel appreciated or important, they burn out. So remember, think of that quadrant. I need to keep them challenged, keep them in a constant state of positive discomfort. Keep them just outside their comfort zone. Give them projects that are too big for them. Not too much too big, but enough too big that it really challenges them. Keep them challenged, make sure they feel important and appreciated. So here's what millennials think. My team is important. I have to work with a good team. And look at the reality check at the bottom. What happens to millennials if you also employ a bunch of crotchety old grouches that seem to have a bad outlook on everything? They disappear. We call them vapors. They're here 1 minute and gone the next. None of you HR people have hired these. Oh, I'm the one. Hire me. After a week, they no longer show up. You know, they won't even go back and get their last check. They don't want the confrontation. So I had to bring you a gift from Texas. Being from Texas, I had to give you something from Texas. This is not the Cowboys, but this is from Texas. Oh, that's my clicker working wrong. Oh, so weird.
Sorry, I was too lazy. I was back there. I'll take care of this.
It just needs to play that video. I think the slide is like reloading, right? Might back out and start it over. Yeah, it has to be on play. It has to be on. There you go. Was it looking for it? All right, let's forget it. You don't get the gift from Texas. It's not that big, not big a deal anyway. Did you fix it?
No, it needs upgraded.
All right. No, we're good. Let's just keep going. Yeah, we're going to run out of time, and I want to get this. So here's one of the things I want you to take from today. I want you to have in your mind, in your notes, in your commitments to yourself post-conference that you will have a written talent strategy. And I want you to think about why this is important. If you don't have a plan for keeping and retaining talent, you're probably going to go back and keep doing what you've been doing. And, you know, many companies rely on hopium. You know what addicted to hopium means? If I just hope they stay, they'll stay. But more than half of all workers are considering leaving your company right now. And I teach, and I'll visit with you about this, I'll help you with this. But there's 7 parts to an effective talent strategy, 7 parts. Some of it's training. It's specifically about how do you keep those people. Some of it is about getting people to understand their role within your organization and their future within your organization. But have a high degree of urgency for this. All right, to summarize. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. So remember, by the year 2025, millennials will be dominant. They're already the majority, but they're going to be even more dominant than they are now. And just, you know, me watching last night and this morning to see how many young people are in such high leadership positions within your organizations affirms this belief for me. There's no time to wait. There's no time to punt. There's no time to kick the ball down the road. It's time to act now. So one of the things I will tell you, I've highlighted these because I think they're so important, but I want you to train your supervisors. People ask me, what is the most important job in an organization? It's not the CEO, even though you may think you are. It's not us HR people. The most important job in any organization is the frontline supervisor, the person that the people who do the work report to. They are the face of management. And I will tell you, if you don't train that population, then your chances of having the biggest impact on your team are minimal. They're the ones that represent management. As a matter of fact, if you've got a really good supervisor, if he's my supervisor and the bigwigs all talk and speak information to me, what I'm probably going to do is go, hey, what do you think about that, boss? I want his opinion on that reality. So train your frontline supervisors. And then make sure that you have a strategy, not just an idea or a hope for keeping the best talent. And I believe one of the components of that is making learning a core part of your strategy. Having a learning mindset. Lead as a learner is what I call it. If you're modeling learning and developing, they expect themselves to do the same thing. If you're not constantly sharpening your own axe, if you're not constantly reading books and blogs, podcasts, and talking about them, they're not going to do it either. And then use proven methods to get your values to the front lines. We call those what? Fundamentals. So, I had an amazing time. I don't know how much time I've got left.
We've got 10 minutes or so for questions.
So I will answer any questions you want related to the topic or not. I may not have the right answer, but I'll give you an answer. Yes, sir.
One of the last things you said was how important it is to train supervisors to improve engagement. What are some of the key things you would train them on to get them to improve engagement?
Okay, so there are 3 pillars for leadership for anyone to be labeled a leader. First one is communication, and there's a difference between communication and effective communication. We all communicate, but we don't all communicate effectively. What do you think the number one reason we don't communicate effectively is? We're lazy. It takes work to be a good communicator. It takes effort to be a good communicator. It takes effort to be a good listener. The second one is the difference between accountability and responsibility. Society has misdefined those terms and used them as synonymous, and they're not synonymous. Accountability is the ability to count, the ability to form an account. Responsibility is the ability to respond. If you have a child, you have the responsibility. You change them when they're dirty. You clothe them when they're cold. You feed them when they're hungry. The ability to respond. When you blur those words together, they become code for blame. You're looking for someone to blame. And then the last pillar is trust. We will not follow someone we don't trust. And here's what I tell these supervisors. Here's what I tell you as managers. And we can certainly debate this after the session if you want. But I believe with every fiber of my being that an employee, for them to trust me as their supervisor, for them to trust me as their manager, I have to be willing to lose my job when it's time to protect them if they've done the right thing. I have to be willing to put my job on the line to stand up for those employees when they've done the right thing and things go wrong. If they don't believe I'm willing to do that, you don't get all of their trust. And trust is incremental. You know, you may trust me to go to lunch with you and your son or daughter, but you don't know me enough to let me go to lunch with your son or daughter by yourself or by myself. So trust is, there's different levels of trust that have to be engaged. But if I'm his supervisor and he does the right thing and it goes bad, if I'm not willing to stand up for him, up to and including losing my job, I don't get all of his trust. Those are the three things I would tell you. There's more. I teach a lot more, but those are the three core things. Great question. Yes?
So you mentioned if you cannot support them during the tough time, then you don't deserve them during the good time.
Yes.
But I want to flip back because we also said, and I'll kind of give a scenario for this afterwards, who you terminate says the most about your dedication to your culture, which I truly do believe. However, one scenario we have right now is someone who, yes, is not embodying the culture that has created an, asshole policy, as he mentioned. And so that is his tough time right now that we're trying to figure out how do we coach him up, I guess, so to speak. So where do you draw the line?
So are you saying he's just enough of a jerk that he's worth saving?
He brings a lot of amazing qualities to the firm. He does have a lot of great things for him, except for he has a problem when it comes to speaking to others, condescendingly speaking to others.
All right, I'll give you an example, and maybe this will help. Tyler, Texas, I was hired to coach a couple of, a manager and a subordinate who were in a high state of dysfunction with each other. So the VP asked me to do that. He said, "Can you go coach them, help them through this with some, with some conflict management?" I said, "I can, and I don't mind doing that, but you have to do something first." He goes, "What is it?" I said, "You have to tell them directly that if they're not willing to resolve this conflict, they're going to lose their job." I said, "Because if you don't, then I'm just going to skip across the surface with them." So I worked with them for several months, better part of 6 months. And at the end of the engagement, the VP said, "What do you think?" All I said was, "I don't think they want to resolve this." About a year later, I'm at a conference in Texarkana, and I see the VP. I said, "Hey, how's Tyler going?" He said, "Man, Tyler is great." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yep, we got rid of them both." He said, "You wouldn't believe how toxic that place had become." So what my answer to you is that person a net positive or a net negative? If they're a net positive and you believe there's an opportunity for them to decide to change, then it's worth that time. But it's a short amount of time. Great question. Awesome. Yes?
What do you do when there aren't many natural opportunities for growth within certain positions, but it's because you're kind of in an area or a stage of stagnation with the company, but you see growth kind of on the other side? How do you retain those people when you can't promise them instant gratification, but you think if they stick around long enough, they will see it? So it's just hanging on to good people when you're in a slump, so to speak. And I'll say our company has been very much impacted by COVID. We're in the hospitality industry, and we're seeing our way out, but with the millennial generation, of which I'm a part of, it's, again, I don't want to wait another year or another 2 years.
So you're feeling stagnant yourself, or the employee?
No, because of my HR role.
Okay.
No, there's enough going on there.
So now, are you defining growth as promotion opportunities?
Not even necessarily promotion opportunities, but the ability to see new things, do new things.
So what some companies are doing, and what's your first name?
Caroline.
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 Okay.
Like the song.
Sweet Caroline? Don't. So what a lot of companies are doing is they're doing a lot of cross-training. They're trying to keep people out of their comfort zone temporarily until they can reach another growth stage. They're doing a lot of long-term development. They're saying, hey, it's kind of like we don't have a lot of wood right now. It's a good time to sharpen our axe. So they're trying to think of things that are not necessarily mission-related, but are people-related, so that they're growing even if there's no place for them to move to. And I would say a caveat, don't make any false promises with that. Because they're smart enough to know that it's a condition. I mean, the young man downstairs at the hotel last night said this place was closed for like 15 months, and he's loyal because he's like 1 year away from being able to have a Marriott room for free for the rest of his life, and that they paid for all of his benefits and everything throughout the time that he was off. So he knows that they're in a point of stagnation. But the company is just trying to do everything they can to make him feel like he's a part of the future for as long as he wants to be. And I guess that's the same situation with you in hospitality, right?
So we're real estate investment, but many of our investments are hotels and such.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Great question. Any others? Did anybody have trouble with the book? Did it download? Okay. If you just message me on my website, I'll make sure you get a copy of the book, okay? I'm very easily reachable. As a matter of fact, if you give me your business card, my response to you, right, Mike, is I'm going to shoot you a text. So I like to be on a texting relationship with everybody that's in my network. Last call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was awesome. So we are going to take a break right now. It's 2:24. We will take a 20-minute break. At 2:45, we'll be back ready to rock and roll. So 20-minute break.